U.S. President Trump says that Iran's nuclear ambition is, quote, the single most important issue. As we've been reporting, he has ordered a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Iran wants recognition of its authority over the Strait, collect transit fees, and control access. The United States says fully opening the Strait of Hormuz to oil tankers is a prerequisite, including unrestricted traffic without any fees. But for more on all of this, let's bring in our guests. From Islamabad, Moshahid Hussain Syed is a defense and foreign policy specialist. He's also the former Pakistani Minister for Information and Culture. From New York, Marco Vincenzo joins us, a global strategy advisor and geopolitical risk specialist. Minister Syed, do you think there is still a possibility for talks at the moment? I ask you this because the U.S. has said we're done, but then we are still in the middle of a ceasefire. The U.S. isn't striking Iran, and Iran isn't striking Israel or the region.
I think that there's still a possibility of talks because the ceasefire is still in place. And neither side, neither the American side in their parting statement, nor the Iranian side in their concluding statement in Islamabad, slammed the door shut for dialogue. They laid out certain conditions, and it was left to further discussion. So I think there is still a window open. And right now also we see the shifting in goalposts, because it started as if the issue is all about nuclear weapons, which Iran doesn't have at the moment. And they don't have any nuclear weapons program worth the name, which Trump said had been obliterated several times. But now it's about Strait of Hormuz. And that's a different situation, which is the consequence of the conflict, not the cause of the conflict. So I think that there is still the opportunity for a dialogue, because both sides know that once there's no dialogue, then the consequences would be destruction on both sides. And it's going to be an unwinnable war.
Marco Vincenzo, the United States wants Iran to agree to American terms. That's what the American vice president said when he left Islamabad. We've made our final offer. It's now up to them. I'm quoting almost directly. It's now up to Iran to decide whether they accept it. So the U.S. has the same bargaining position now that it had before the conflict, which is we want what we want. Iran didn't accept their terms before the conflict. And for the moment, Iran is still not unconditionally accepting their terms. Do you think at some point this U.S. bargaining strategy ends up working?
Basically, we got to look at it in a broader historic context. We're talking about 24 years of much of the same song. In 2002, when an Iranian opposition group brought the nuclear program to the attention of the rest of the world, we've seen a process of negotiations over ups and downs, processes that have ebbed and flowed. But what they've been marked with is by a lack of trust, deep suspicions. And you have now, what the difference is now is that you've had a meeting at the highest level of a U.S. vice president, meeting with a high-level delegation from Iran in Islamabad. You have stakes are higher than ever, compared to, if you look relatively compared to the past 24 years, and trust is at its lowest. So if we look over a 24-year period, we've reached the height now in terms of tensions and stakes being at the highest, as I mentioned. But a lot of it is, obviously, you have the Hormuz factor, which is relatively a newer dimension. But overall, with that lack of trust, I think, in my opinion, what you're going to be seeing happening, even if they come back to the table, you still have a 2-week, there's about a bit less than 2 weeks left of this. And the things they share in common is no one wants to go back to war. Principally, Trump has midterm elections in November. Netanyahu's got to have elections before October of this year. Iran itself is struggling to survive, although it's in a fairly stronger position, although it's been depleted in terms of its Navy and its Air Force. We all know the rest in terms of facts. But the rest of the world, the Gulf region, Asia, the Americas, Europe, everyone's sitting on edge. It'll be catastrophic if there's a return to armed force. So although both may not have agreed yet on any, and there's a trust still a wide gap, I think they agree that they don't want to have a return to armed force. And basically, I think in the longer term, even if something may be signed, what you're going to see is basically, we're not going to see any time in the foreseeable future, we're not going to see a stable peace. We're not going to see, I think, an uninterrupted war. What we're going to have is a prolonged state of managed instability.
Minister Syed, is trust needed to actually get a breakthrough in negotiations? You heard Marco Vincenzino there saying that there's no trust between the parties, and I think everyone agrees on this. Iran says it, the U.S. says it. But is trust actually a precondition for some kind of deal or agreement to be reached or not?
Yes, I think there has to be a modicum of trust, because ultimately the two sides feel that what is signed, what is said, is going to be implemented. If they feel that the other side is engaged in a war of deception, of deceit, and based on untruths or lies, which the US has been doing. They've fought 2 wars against Iran based on deception and lies. Same with Netanyahu. So the Iranians feel that even coming to Islamabad was for them a security risk, because they was feeling they might be even shot down. And you have articles in the Washington Post calling for the assassination of negotiators, which is unprecedented and frankly in modern negotiating history. So given that there's a yawning chasm.
That's not U.S. government policy. I just want to make clear that what you're referring to is an
op-ed
in the American press. It in no way represents U.S. official policy.
Yeah. But even a serious newspaper, because the U.S. has already assassinated people. So assassination is part of American and Israeli policy. So when they talk of assassinating the negotiators, it's not that far-fetched. So given that context, I think trust is very, very important. And that trust can only be achieved perhaps not by the two sides directly. It can be done by outside elements of friendly forces of countries like Pakistan or China or other guarantors who can come into the situation and bridge the gap. So trust, I think, is a paramount factor in finally having a deal. And I agree that the option to the current scenario is war, and nobody wants that, because at least Trump, when he launched the war, is based on a monumental miscalculation, and he now realizes that it's going to be politically costly for him also. That's why he wants to cut a deal and call it quits.
What can Pakistan do? Because Pakistan has been an intermediary. Pakistan can pass messages, but if the two sides simply disagree, as appears to be the case right now, I'm just not sure, Minister, what more Pakistan can do at that point.
I think that I was listening to your statements. You've had 2 statements from Iranian leaders. Both are quite reasonable. Iran was just supposed to be the hardliner party, the intransigent or obdurate in their approach, is very flexible. I think the U.S. is the problem. And the problem, frankly, for me is Netanyahu. He is the spoiler. If Netanyahu can be leashed by Trump or the Trump administration, because he has a vested interest in continuing this conflict. Otherwise, when the conflict ends, it's his political demise. He'll either end up in jail in Israel because he's already has corruption charges, and he's also a wanted war criminal. So I think Netanyahu is the only one who has stakes in continued war, not Trump, not the Iranians. So I think you have to first leash Netanyahu. It is not Israel first. It has to be America first. And unfortunately, this war has been driven by Netanyahu. And the New York Times story confirmed that on 11th February, it was Netanyahu who sold the war to Trump. And he bought it hook, line, and sinker.
Well, actually, that story, it was very interesting, and I think many of us read it. What that story says is certainly that Netanyahu made a full court press to Donald Trump himself about why he thought the U.S. should join Israel in a war against Iran. But the article also stated essentially that Donald Trump agreed with that line of thinking, more than he agreed, that's what the article reported, with anything that anyone else in the room was saying. That included his Secretary of Defense, his chairman of the Joint Chiefs, et cetera. So in other words, it reflected what Donald Trump felt and thought. Marco Vincenzino, negotiations are about leverage. And at the same time, pretty much, that the U.S. said, Iran has our final offer, it's up to them to take it or leave it, they announced a new tactic, right, on Donald Trump's Truth Social, which was the U.S. is now going to fully blockade the Strait of Hormuz. No ships go on, no ships go out. That is their plan. That appears designed to give the U.S. more leverage. Do you think it can work?
And, unilaterally, it'll be a challenge, not impossible. But it would, in order to work effectively, I think you would need the help in terms of other nations in participating, European allies, other allies from Asia, other willing. We hear about the term coalition of the willing over the years. This would be, I think, such a case. Ultimately, the U.S. Navy would be the one to enforce it. But to have that support, not just from an asset perspective, but also from a political, diplomatic perspective, I think would be very, very helpful. To go at it unilaterally on its own, possible, but far more difficult. And with the help of other, like I said, of other allies, it's like I said, it's not just the assets that they have. The U.S. has most of the assets, but in terms of credibility and perception, global perception, it's important also to have your allies on board to participate. Even if some countries have limited assets, even if it's a single minesweeper, part of that helps in the entire effort. But I think what's important here is to realize is that if we're looking at a chess game, looking at 24 years of being played, and now we're escalating, Trump has now moved a piece on the chessboard, escalating technically, yes, but not elevating it to the level of the use of armed force. And once again, I think that's what both sides for now, there's a dance going on. Each one is trying to check the other one. But the thing is that the question is, will there be a return to the use of armed force? And I think for now, within this 2-week ceasefire that where several days have already passed by, I think during that time, neither side is going to make a move in terms of use of armed forces. But after that, the situation, once again, you have this ceasefire offers something very temporary. It's limited relief, but much uncertainty. And what comes after, that chess game continues. Now, the U.S. makes a move with Trump that he just made, and how the Iranians will counter that. Will they counter with the one that gets close to the use of armed force or not? So the dance continues in the next few days. But once again, once we reach that 2-week ceasefire limit, what's going to happen after that? And at the stage we're at right now, once we're going to refer to that lack of trust, we refer to that, it's that 24-year period of on and off negotiations reaching a maximum high level with both sides generally taking maximalist positions. Is there room in between? And even if they reach something, I'll make that same case. We're going to have a prolonged state of managed instability, which the private sector needs to be prepared for.
A prolonged state of managed instability. Okay. Listen, thank you very much. Moshahid Hussain Syed, Defense and Foreign Policy Specialist, also Pakistan's former Minister of Information and Culture, and Marco Vincenzino, Global Strategy Advisor, Geopolitical Risks Specialist. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.